Okay, I got the tire off. Now we're gonna get to where the problem is, and I'll show you here in a minute. Here, just all right. Tire over my camera. Anyway, YouTube, here's what's wrong. This right here. That's the problem. That is the outer tie rod end, and when you move, you can see when you move it back and forth. See the play? So that's what's wrong. That's what we're changing. Yeah. So now, this is how we do this. Okay, now first thing I want to find. Spray.
Up there, you already sitting already.
Joe, turn your wheel all the way to the right. Aw, there's a damn doors on a bind. Here, hold it. Turn it all the way to the right. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, after I had my neighbor turn his wheels to the right, it was so I could have easier access to the jam nut that locks the outer tie rod end to the inner tie rod end. Basically, the outer tie rod end screws on to the end of the inner tie rod end, and there's a jam nut. So that's what I was doing there, was loosening that jam nut up. Now I'm getting my air gun out, and I'm taking the nut off the bottom of the tie rod end where it goes through the steering knuckle. It's a 15 millimeter bolt, or nut, excuse me. And if you have air tools, it makes it nice. It helps out a lot. But as you will see later on here, I do run into some trouble. So, but once I find the right size socket and I get it on there, the nut would not come all the way off of the end of the threaded section. So, and what ended up happening is it started spinning inside. It actually came loose out of the knuckle, which usually, it happens, especially when you're using air tools. And what happened is because of the tie rod end being so bad, he left it go for so long, it just was spinning inside the threaded part, which is a tapered bolt section, was spinning inside the tie rod end. So I couldn't get it out. So now here I am with I have a pry bar, and what I'm trying to do is put pressure, trying to hold upward pressure on the pry on the tie rod end, so that way when I put the air gun to it, to try to get that nut off. And after several attempts of trying to get that nut the rest of the way off, and you'll see here, I'm trying to get it off, and it won't come off. So I end up having to get a die grinder and actually cut it off. And that's a common thing. Sometimes you have to cut the nut off, or to be able to get out the tie rod end off the spindle. it happens when the tie rod end goes bad. Like I said, when you have trouble with it like this one, sometimes it just makes your life easier. But as you can see here, I'm just trying to, like I said, put pressure on it to try to, now I'm taking a hammer, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to pound it back down into the knuckle. I'm hoping that if I get that tapered seat to lock in there again, that it'll hold. And I put the air gun to it, to no avail. It just popped right back out, and like I said, here I am trying to hold down on it now to get that. And sometimes it seemed like it was turning it, but it wasn't. It would turn it and it wouldn't turn. It got, the nut almost came all the way off the end. It probably was about half the nut length left, and it just would not come off the end of that. Just could not get it off the end of the tie rod end. So therefore, like I said, I'm trying, and as you can see, it's not it's not coming off. It's in fact it's being a pain in the butt. So I'm beating, like here I am again trying to seat it back down into the steering knuckle again. Like I said, sometimes that works. If you can get that tapered part to seat back down in the knuckle, and you hit it with an air gun real fast, sometimes it'll hold it long enough to spin that nut off. And as you can see, it's just that's something that shouldn't take all that long. This is what happens in mechanic work. Sometimes these little unforeseen problems that you have, and this just happens to be one of those. Right now, like I said, I'm trying to keep that pressure down, that downward pressure to help, to hold that down in the knuckle. But every time I'd put the air to it, it would just pop up back out. And there I am with the hammer again, trying to get it to seat in there, so I could get that off the end. And here we go again with the air, to no avail. It was really being stubborn. Now here I am with the wrench. What I did with the wrench is I put the wrench between the lower control arm and the tie rod end, or the steering knuckle and the tie rod end. And I was prying up on the tie rod end, and putting pressure and trying to hold up on it to try to just even, to try to get that nut off. And like I said, it was just being a pain. So I end up, like I said earlier, I ended up having to get my die grinder out, and you'll see here that in fact, that's what I'm doing now. I'm getting the die grinder together and getting it ready. And sometimes this happens. Here I am. I was explaining what was going on, but I'll show you here in a second. Apologize for the camera work, but now you can see what I'm going to do is cut that nut off. And that's what I was trying to show you. I wanted you to see, what I was going to do. But as you can see, that nut was sticking down, and there's some space in between the knuckle and the nut. And what I'm going to do is take a die grinder, and I'm just gonna buzz that right off. And once I cut that off, you'll see how fast it only takes a couple seconds for that thing to cut through there. Then I was able to get the tie rod off the steering knuckle, and you'll see that here in a couple seconds. Notice I'm wearing safety goggles. Anytime you're doing anything like that, any type of this type of work, you should always wear safety goggles, and you should always support your vehicle with a jack stand, like you see here. It's not really safe to just put a jack underneath it and not support the vehicle with a jack stand. So it's always a good idea to use a jack stand. And like I said, wear safety goggles, especially when you're using a piece of equipment like a die grinder. I've seen these discs come apart, and pieces fly, and right now, like, the sparks are coming towards me because I couldn't flip it the other direction to be able to cut it so the sparks would go the opposite. So, like I said, always wear safety goggles. But as you can see, this makes pretty quick work of it, and they're really nice. Boom, boom. Couple seconds and it's off. I mean, it didn't take long to cut through that, and so as you can see here, I am cutting, and like I said, it doesn't take long. But if in a pinch, this is probably the best way to get that nut off. I mean, if it's spinning inside the socket. Now here I'm going to take the pry bar and pop it up out of the knuckle. Okay, and now here I couldn't get out with the pry bar, so what I did is I smacked the knuckle with the hammer, a couple whacks, and boom, there it is. It's off. Now what I'm doing now is I'm counting the turns that it takes to get the tie rod end off, so that way I can put the new tie rod end close to where it's at. No matter what you do, you're not going to get it exact. So anytime you do anything, change a tie rod end, an inner or an outer tie rod end, you have to get an alignment done. And right here, what I'm doing is, like I said, I'm counting the turns, so that way when I put it on, I can put it back in the same spot. But all you have to do then, after this, is you reinstall in reverse order, and it's pretty simple. You just put the tie rod end back onto the threaded section, tighten up the jam nut, put it back through the steering knuckle, and put your castle nut on, put your Carter key through, and that's pretty much it. It's pretty easy. It's not a hard job to do. And like I said, all you got to do is in reverse order of how you took it apart. And like I said, this just shows you, though, sometimes you can run into problems. And thank you for watching. I hope everyone, there it is. There's the threaded section. But like I said, I counted that to try to you want to try to get as close as you can, but like I said, you'll never get it exact. So, and I'm gonna take the jam nut off, and then I'll reinstall the new one. Like I said, all you got to do is rethread it back onto that threaded section right there, and you put the other end through the steering knuckle. Also, okay, the new one had a grease fitting. Okay, the old one was greaseless. The new one, I had to install a grease fitting. Make sure you grease it. Don't just put it on and forget about it. You have to grease them because if you don't, it'll wear out the tie rod end prematurely. They do put some grease in them, but not enough. You do have to grease the Zurich fitting. So like I said, the new one is greasable, which is great. So make sure if your new one comes with a grease fitting, make sure you grease it, because if you don't, that tie rod end is it's not gonna last nowhere near what it should, and it will go bad. On this this is a 1999 Ford Contour. Right there at the end of the threaded part, that takes a 15mm wrench so you can keep it from turning, and the jam nut itself is a 21mm. Okay, and the nut, now these were factory, they were never changed. It was the factory tie rod end, so it was 15mm, and that's pretty much all you need. A 15mm socket, a 15mm wrench, ratchet and socket, a 15mm wrench, and a 21mm wrench, and you can do this job. It's not very difficult. It's pretty easy. How you check your tie rod ends to see if they're bad, all you do is grab the wheel, and you move it back and forth, and you can feel play. If you feel it wiggling, and you'll feel it's real. If it's real loose and it's not tight when you go to wiggle the tire, that's how you know you got a bad tie rod end. And like I said, that was the case in this. In fact, my neighbor had to get new tires because of it. So it definitely, here I am taking that jam nut off, but like I said, it's not a hard job to do. Anybody can do it in a few minutes. It just takes a little bit of time. Just make sure you're safe. Be safe about it. And with the proper tools, air tools help. But you don't have to have them. I just happen to have a compressor, and I do have air tools, so I'm lucky. But like I said, this job is not a hard job to do at all. And the thing about it is, an outer tie rod end is pretty much the same for all vehicles. The inner tie rods now on some cars are different, but the outer tie rod end on almost all cars are pretty much the same way. So this really applies for just about, for quite a few cars, and trucks for that matter. Like I said, they just spin, they just thread, and that's how that's how an alignment's done. When they do an alignment, they actually they adjust the tie rod in and out, and that's what it's used. That's what that threaded part is for. That's actually what they use to do your alignment with. But like I said, no matter how much you do your counting, no matter how much counting you do, you're not going to get it perfect. So you definitely gotta get an alignment done. I hope you liked the video. If you do, please rate, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you guys in the next one. And don't be afraid to try something new, because fixing cars isn't rocket science. But just take your time, and you'll be all right. We'll see you in the next one.